Hey y'all, it's Lacey, and today I'm here to do my March wrap-up. Technically, March isn't over. I think today is the 30th, but I'm not going to finish any more books in the month of March, so I figured I'd come on here and get this filmed while I had some time. So, in March, I've got my notes right here. I read 6 books, DNF'd 1 book, and 3 of them were audiobooks. Well, the 3 that I finished, 3 of them that I finished were audiobooks. I DNF'd 1 audiobook. So if I hadn't DNF'd that, it would have been 7 books for the month, but the last one that I was just listening to recently, I wasn't into it, so I just decided to, cut it loose. The first book that I finished in the month of March was an audiobook, and it was The Great Alone by Kristen. I liked this book. It was pretty good. I've heard a lot of people talk about it on booktube. It revolves around a family, a mom, dad, and their daughter Lenny. They moved to Alaska, and they are woefully unprepared for the environment in that state. And I think it takes place in the 70s. So the dad is a Vietnam War veteran. He's home from the war. I think he was a POW, so he's suffering from, post-traumatic stress disorder, but back when there was no name for that, they didn't call it that. So obviously he's got a lot of, pent-up anger and emotions. So he gets a piece of land from a friend that had passed away. They move up to Alaska, not prepared at all, and just, it revolves around their life up there and him kind of regressing into this post-traumatic stress. There's a lot of domestic abuse in this book, which was kind of hard to listen to, but it's a real in-depth family story. It's hard to describe because the parents in this book really irritated me. There's a strong codependent relationship going on between the mom and the dad, and it's like you get it in one point because there's some domestic abuse, you hear about it all the time. People in these relationships, they find it hard to leave, but there's some real, on the mom's part, some codependency that was just frustrating to the point where you just wanted to scream at her yourself because, you got the feeling that she really didn't want to leave her husband. Even though he was beating her, you felt like she was okay with it, she could deal with it. But the daughter is really the main character, and I think when the story starts, she's 14, and is witnessing her her parents, the abuse between her dad and her mom, and it just, at first it's like she doesn't really realize how bad it is. I mean, he obviously yells a lot and lashes out, but she doesn't get the extent of it until she's older and starts seeing more of it, because apparently it's said several times in the book that bad weather, bad seasons and weather, and really affect his mood. And I'm like, why would you move to Alaska if the seasons, basically seasonal affective disorder, where people get depressed when it's wintertime. It's like, why would you move to a state that has such a long winter and such long nights? Like I said, the family frustrated me in this. And then, I'll move on in a minute, but in the end, there were some decisions made by the mom that just, I get it, but then I felt like it was just trying to drag the story out a little too long. It could have ended a little bit earlier and been fine. It would have been a great book. But there was something that happened, and I don't really want to say, at the end of the book that I was like, really? That's what you're going to do? That's the decision you're going to make? I felt like there could have been some other decisions made in that instance. I don't know. Overall, I liked the book. I'm glad I listened to it on audiobook because I don't know if I could have read it. I think I maybe would have given up on it, or at least put it down for a while if I had actually been reading the book. I think overall on Goodreads I gave it 4 stars because the setting of Alaska was really what made that book too. It's like it really made me want to go to Alaska now. I really want to visit Alaska. And that was really kind of a character too, I think. The environment and the scenery of that state really brought that story to life. And really, I guess when the story is set, Alaska really hadn't been a state for all that long. So there weren't very many people going there or living there. I mean, there were people who lived there, obviously, but, you know, it just wasn't as, I guess people didn't go there as much as they do now. Anyway, so that was the first book that I finished in the month of March. The second book I finished was a physical book, and it was James Rollins' Crucible. This is the 14th book in his Sigma Force series, so I won't go into too many details because it is a series, and I think you can kind of read them as standalones, but there's some character backstory that runs throughout the series that if you haven't kind of been reading it from the beginning, you might be a little lost on. But I mean, I love James Rollins in this series. There was a artificial intelligence storyline that went through this one that I didn't quite get because that stuff just kind of goes over my head. But his books always have a scientific storyline that's also kind of based on some historical story that has some basis in fact and truth, but he does, you know, exaggerate a little bit for the story because he always includes notes in the back of the book about what was based on truth, what was kind of, you know, he took some liberties with. But overall, I mean, I liked this story. The third book that I finished was another audiobook. It was called Killing England, The Brutal Struggle for American Independence by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. I really liked this book. I like history, but I find it hard to find books that I want to read about history because a lot of the times they're real dry and, you know, like just info dumps with dates and, you know, places and things that just kind of make it a little boring. So I don't read about history a lot. And I'm kind of glad I listened to this one on audiobook too, because I listened to it in the car. It was an easy listen. And there were also footnotes throughout the book that would add a little bit extra information about a certain thing or event or a person, kind of like little bits of trivia that kind of it added to the telling of the history. And, you know, it revolved around like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin, those big players in American independence, and their different roles throughout the war. I liked it. I really enjoyed listening to it, and like I said, you know, it was, you didn't feel like you were just getting dumped on with like specific dates and battles and people, you know, all the different names that came up throughout the war. It's like it kind of read like a story. Like the fourth book that I finished was a physical book, and it was Stories I Only Tell My Friends by Lowe. I really enjoyed this one. I felt like he was really honest and down to earth. It really did seem like just, it wasn't like a biography or anything like that. It's more like a memoir, just a collection of stories about different experiences he's had. He went into a lot of detail about when he was making The Outsiders, and then West Wing, and just throughout his life and some struggles that he had, and then his life as a husband and father, and And like I said, it came off as really honest, and like you feel like if you met him, he would be a really interesting person to talk to. Like you could really have a conversation with him. He wouldn't be one of, come off as like kind of snobby and stuck up. I don't know. But it was a really easy read, so I enjoyed it. The next book that I finished was another audiobook, Escape from Camp 14, One Man's Remarkable Odyssey from North Korea to Freedom in the West by Blaine Harden. And this one revolved around a young man named Shin. It's a nonfiction. A young man named Shin who was born and raised in one of the labor camps in North Korea. He never had been outside of this camp. I knew nothing about even just the struggles of the rest of the people in the country. Had no idea what was going on in the rest of North Korea. And when he was, I think, 12, his mother and older brother tried to escape and were caught and eventually executed, and he had to witness that. And it just went into details about the struggles of people inside these labor camps, and how there's no food, there's no electricity, they're basically prisoners. And his only punishment, and I mean the reason he was in here is because like his father some of his family members had tried to rebel against the government at one point, and so they rounded up their entire families and put them in a labor camp. And then his parents, I guess, were matched up and married in the labor camp. And that's how he was born. So, I mean, he knew of no life outside of this camp. I mean, didn't really know anything existed. And then someone else came into the camp later when he was older and started telling him about life in the outside world, because they had lived in the outside world, like outside of North Korea, actually, and come back for some reason. I forget why. I don't understand why anybody would come back into North Korea if they didn't have to or weren't dragged in there. But he came back, got caught because they thought he was like a spy or something, and got put in this labor camp with Shin, and started telling him about things. And the thing that Shin most was interested in was him talking about all the food that was available in other places, like how people could just eat when they wanted, what they wanted, and how much they wanted. So then he was able to eventually escape, and he made it outside of the camp into the main country of North Korea, and couldn't believe, what, like, people's lives, that there were actually people who were able to freely walk around. But I mean, it's still North Korea. But then eventually he was able to get out of North Korea altogether, and then make his way to South Korea, and then eventually to America. But the thing that was the most interesting to me was that his struggles didn't end once he escaped. I mean, it's really, they don't just escape from North Korea and are able to live normal lives. I mean, they've never been given skills to function really in regular society. They've been so brainwashed and beaten down that it's hard for them to acquire skills to be able to go on and live a productive life. And and then the trauma of it all too, it's hard for them to get over that. So they really struggle even after they've escaped from this brutality, to integrate into a normal Western culture. But it was a really good read. It was hard to listen to at some points, and you really start to feel really thankful for the life that you have. The 6th book that I finished in March was If Tomorrow Comes by Sidney Sheldon. It was around a woman named Tracy, and in the beginning she's got an amazing life. She's she's young. I think she's in her mid-20s. She's got the man of her dreams. She's just found out she's pregnant, and she's just got this amazing life, and she can't be happier. Well, then something happens to her mother, and she realizes that her mother was taken advantage of by some people. And in her attempt to rectify this situation, she gets tricked and ends up in prison. I don't want to go into too many details because how it happens is just crazy. So anyway, she goes to prison and, you know, starts serving her time, and some things happen to her there. And then eventually she gets released, and she exacts revenge against the people who had tricked her and taken advantage of her and manipulated her. So she gets revenge on those people, and it's really good. And then she thinks that she's going to be able to go back into, you know, to her regular life, you know, get a job and just, you know, live out the rest of her days. But because of her record, she can't do that. So she's got to figure out what to do. And she kind of hooks up with a guy who, they use her talents of manipulation and trickery to take advantage of people that sometimes aren't nice. Kind of think of it as, while I was reading it, it made me think of like the Ocean's 11 movies, where they're con artists. You know, that's what she becomes. She becomes a con artist, and it's a really fun read. I think if you like those movies, you would maybe enjoy this book. And when I was putting it on my Goodreads, you know, to track my reading, I saw where it actually has some sequels to it, which this was one of those books that when I had read it years and years and years ago, I had always wished it had a sequel because I wanted to see what happened to the characters afterwards. So when I was on Goodreads, I saw where it actually has 2 sequels. They're not written by Sidney Sheldon because he's passed away. So I'm not sure how good the sequels are going to be, but I actually went ahead and bought them because I was really curious and really want to see what happens to these characters. So yeah, I don't know when I'll get to those, but I was really excited to see that there were sequels to these characters. Alright, the 7th book that I had on my list to read was an audiobook, and it was called Nothing to Envy: Ordinary Lives in North Korea by Barbara Demick. This is the one that I actually DNF'd. I was listening to it on audiobook and really wasn't connecting with it. It had a different perspective than the other one that I listened to, whereas that revolved around someone who grew up in a labor camp. This one was about, you know, regular people in North Korea. But it was just, it kind of got repetitive, and and the people that it was talking about, like, you really couldn't keep up with who she was talking about when. It really jumped back and forth, and I felt like you really didn't get a feel for their lives in North Korea. I mean, it talked about how they never had food and the famines, which is a big part of that country. But there's more stuff that happens to people in that country, like with the military, and just, you know, you can't say anything about the government or the leaders without fear of, you know, imprisonment or punishment. And it's like, it really didn't focus on any of that. It mainly talked about how they never had any food to eat, and how the food rations eventually stopped, and how the famine and things like that. So it just got really repetitive, and I think I made it to like chapter 8, and just really wasn't, you know, connecting with it. So I decided to just cut it loose and, you know, move on to something else. Ooh, sorry, the wind just kicked up and kind of startled me. So anyway, those were the 6 books that I finished and the one that I DNF'd, which was actually a really good month for me. I'm a slow reader, so, you know, I was really surprised that I was able to get through so many, well, at least physical books. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks because I listen to them while I'm driving to and from work. But physical books, I was really surprised. I mean, I know 3 might not sound like a lot to some people, but for me, it was actually pretty good. So Anyway, that's my month. This was my first wrap-up, so I don't know if I described the books in good enough detail. I don't know. I feel like it was a little patchy, but maybe by next month it'll be a little bit better. I feel like I need to make notes on each book so I remember what I want to say about them when I go to do my next wrap-up. Maybe that's what I'll do. So anyway, that was my month, and I don't really have a TBR for April. I'm just gonna read what I feel like. So you know, we'll see what I finish by the end of next month. Alright, that's it. You know, if you liked it, subscribe, hit like, say hello in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.